We're always glad to have missionaries. I love it. It worked out great that we hit the resurrection on Easter Sunday, and then we had the Great Commission, and now we have people living the Great Commission, literally going to the ends of the earth, other places around the world to make disciples for Jesus. So this is Blake and Allison, and Gina and I had a chance to meet them prior to this. We got to go have lunch with them and just had an enjoyable conversation getting to know them. But nobody else has got to meet you guys yet, so would you just get it started kind of sharing a little bit about yourselves and how you met, what married life is like, all those sort of things?
Yeah, so my name is Blake Kendrick. There's a lot of reverb on this. Fun. But anyway, my name is Blake Kendrick. I was born and raised in Anderson, South Carolina. Well, actually, I was born in a town called Townville, South Carolina, but no one knows where that is. Can I see any hands if anyone knows where Townville, South Carolina is? Yeah, that makes sense.
Zero.
We don't even have a stop sign in Townville, but we do have a Dollar General. So yeah, so it's a real small. Yeah, let's go Dollar General. They put it in whenever I was 10. So, but yeah, so it's up and coming town. It was a small town. My parents were very involved in our church. I grew up in an AG church in Seneca, South Carolina. It was about 300 people, and whenever I was about 18, we had a pretty major thing happen in our church, which led to it completely collapsing. And that ejected me out of Christianity completely. So 18, going into college, I absolutely hated God. And it wasn't until I was a junior at going to Clemson University, go Tigers. Again, swing and a miss. All right, we're off to a great start.
If you said, go dogs, you would get a much better response.
Yeah, I can't do that. I'm sorry. It's impossible. So anyway, I was a junior at Clemson University, and that was where I got bribed by a Chi Alpha missionary with a free meal. I got bribed by a Chi Alpha missionary with a free meal in order to come to their events. And it was through the relationship with these Christians on campus where the Lord really repaired all that church hurt and all that hatred that I had in my heart towards Christianity and towards Christians. And he called me and reconciled me to himself. Yeah, that's kind of me.
I was also blessed enough to grow up in a Christian household. I actually grew up in a Southern Baptist church that my family had attended for many generations. So a lot of people like to call me Baptist-costal now because I've got a little bit of both in me. But my parents served a lot in that church. They were the first ones in the doors, last one out. So my parents really just fostered a servant's heart in me. At the age of 11 is actually when I gave my life to Christ. A missionary came to our church, and he shared about his walk with the Lord and all the ministry opportunities that he was involved in, and the Lord just called me to fully go all in for him, and so that's when I gave my life to Christ. And I wanted to serve in any way that I could, and at that time, I really felt called to kids ministry, and so that's really where my heart for missions is serving kids and families and discipling them. Fast forward a little bit, Blake and I actually met in high school, so we went to middle school and high school together, and we started dating senior year of high school. We went to college. I went to a small Christian university right down the road, and he went to Clemson. We got married in December of 2021, so we've been married for 2 years, and we like to call ourselves experts because we've passed a year. We feel like we've crossed every problem that could come. And yeah, so after we both graduated, we did a year serving with Chi Alpha Ministries on Clemson University, and I also taught first grade at a local elementary school. And hopefully this summer we will be going to Alicante, Spain.
So something I want to, you both have, you came to really recommit your life to Jesus with Chi Alpha, and then you guys served with Chi Alpha. Can you explain just, for those that may not know, what Chi Alpha is?
Yeah, so Chi Alpha, it stands for Christ Ambassadors. It is the Assemblies of God's presence on college campuses in the United States. So right now, you guys are supporting, you as a denomination are supporting missionaries who are on UGA's campus, USC's campus, Clemson's campus, Georgia Tech's campus, and these missionaries are there full-time ministering to students who are just like me, and just like other people who have walked away from God. What we see within our college campuses, our secular campuses, is that if you are a Christian and you come to college, there's a 70% chance that you walk away from the Lord while you're in college. And so Chi Alpha is there to give students the opportunity to encounter God on their campuses. It's a lovely, incredible organization. I've never met, we were talking about it the other day because we were at USC this past Thursday. We've never met a Chi Alpha missionary who is not the most loving person on the planet. So yeah.
Something, but I guess before I jump into that, how did you end up in missions? Especially because you had no sense of calling as a kid or anything like that. You went to college hating God, mad at the church. How did you end up going from that to, within a few years, I'm ready to go to Spain with my new bride? And
yeah. Yeah, so it's a long story, and Pastor said we can't be here all day, so I will only kind of share the highlights, I guess. But yeah, it was through my relationships with people that I met and during my time at Clemson, where the Lord kind of softened my heart and then broke it for himself, and I fell in love with Jesus. Like I for the first time in my life, I fell in love with Jesus. And I was studying Spanish and international business. So in order to complete that degree, you have to do a study abroad somewhere. And it was 2021 at the time, so that second wave of COVID was hitting the rest of the world, so everything got shut down except for one program in Alicante, Spain. And so I wanted to graduate, so I went to Alicante, Spain in order to do this study abroad. And it was while I was there that the Lord took this newly formed heart that he had just given me, like less than a year before, and he smashed it against the ground. As I saw millions of people who were exactly like I had been, and there was no one that was those friends for me that would engage in those conversations. So they had no chance, like the chances that I was given. And so God really broke my heart in that way. And so I called Allison 4 weeks before our wedding and told her, I don't think I'll be able to sleep at night if I come home and just get a secular job and just go about my life. See, after meeting these people, like their faces are ingrained in my head, and I don't think I'll be able to sleep at night unless we come back here and do something about this. And then she took a few days, right? I want to tell them about that.
Yeah, so at the time we were planning our lives. Like you said, it was 4 weeks before our wedding. So we were looking at houses to buy. We wanted to be close to home. And so he calls me 4 weeks before our wedding and says that he feels called to go to Alicante, Spain, and be missionaries there. And I was completely taken back by that because that was not my plan that I had for my life. Obviously, I was not listening to what God's plan was for my life. I was just following my plan for my life.
And that's not what you signed up for when you agreed to marry him.
Exactly.
And
yes.
now you're 4 weeks out from the wedding.
Yes. So
all of the deposits had been paid, so she was kind of boxed into a corner.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, that was not what I was signed up for. That's not what I was planning for my life. So I was just completely taken off guard by that. So I took 3 days and I just prayed to the Lord and asked him if this is what he actually had planned for me. And for me, it was just an overwhelming sense of peace. It wasn't the sky didn't open up and God didn't say, Allison, you will do this. It was just an overwhelming peace that he gave me, and he reassured me that that was what he had planned for us for our mission.
That's huge. That really is. I mean, and on one hand, you can thank COVID that they've gone to the particular city they're in, but that's how the Lord directs our steps. It's not always in the sky parts and the ray beams down and the voice booms. It's just God nudges us. He leads us. He guides us. He directs and gives peace. And that's huge, huge, huge. Something that Blake had mentioned to me earlier that I didn't know until just this morning. He recommitted his life to Jesus through Chi Alpha's work on campuses. And he said that as they were at some of these training sessions with other missionaries, something like 60+% of our missionaries in the Assemblies of God are coming through Chi Alpha with similar stories of, I was not a Christian, I was not following Jesus when I went to school, but Chi Alpha roped me in with pizza, I gave my life to Jesus, and now I want to go serve Jesus around the world. And that's huge. I mean, we should celebrate that, and we should look for ways to partner more with Chi Alpha. But on the other side of that coin, it dawned on me immediately, if the vast majority of our missionaries were not believers when they went to college, where are all of the children being raised in our churches, and why are they not going into vocational ministry opportunities? And that just burdened me as a parent and as a pastor and as somebody that cares about the next generation. I think you heard him say the statistic earlier that over 70% of Christian kids that go to school walk away from the faith. And so God is having to reach people that are not following him as adults to go out because the children we're raising are not following Jesus when they grow up. And I just pray that that would break your hearts and all of our hearts to really, one, if you've got kids at home, let's make sure that we really teach them and train them to follow Jesus well. We've got to model it. We've got to live it. We can't just bring them to church and think that's it. And we can't just send them to church and think that that's it. We can't just assume that the Sunday school teachers are doing a great job. We can't just assume that they're getting everything they need on Sunday morning. It has to be day in, day out, Monday through Saturday and Sunday. It's a whole week, whole life thing of modeling, teaching, training, and guiding, because that was kind of heartbreaking. I mean, it's exciting on the Chi Alpha front. They're doing a phenomenal job, and God is going to bring people because God wants the world to be reached. But, man, we just need to pray for this next generation. We really do.
Yeah, and I would say, we worked on campus for a year, mentoring and discipling students. And one of the stories that we kept hearing over and over again is that anytime someone had a radical changing of life experience, like mine, or I have a friend that we got to meet. We'll call her Ren. She was born and raised in the church, and then in middle school she started feeling same-sex attraction, and so she started to pursue that, and then she became transgender. And by the time she was in college, she was practicing Wiccan and witchcraft, and she was doing drugs. And then she had a come to Jesus moment in her kitchen where the voice of the Lord audibly spoke to her and told her to repent. And so she immediately threw all that stuff away. But when you listen to her story and when you dig in to her life, you find out that her mother and her grandmother never stopped praying for her. They continued to intercede on her behalf for years. And it was through that intercession and that prayer that she had that moment where she encountered Jesus. And now she's actually in Athens, Georgia right now. She graduated she left college a few years ago, and now she's in Athens, Georgia with a sign and a speaker doing street ministry with no job or anything. Like, she is just in Athens, Georgia, preaching about her experience on the street and leading people to Christ. It comes from the intercessions of family members that our generation is getting reached.
So keep praying. Keep praying for your kids. Keep praying for your grandkids. For any of those family members that are not serving Jesus, keep praying.
Yeah, because he's Waymaker.
He is. Absolutely. Nice tie-in. David, on the soundboard, if you could, on the second or third slider in all the way from the right, where it says effects, if you could just pull that down, that would pull the reverb out of his deal, and that would be helpful. So we know you ended up in Spain because kind of COVID, that was the only place you could go to finish school, and so that's where God put it on your hearts. And talked about some of that. When you're going to be over there, you're going to be working with an international church, right? So can you explain what an international church is and what you'll be doing ministry-wise there?
Yeah, so we will be going over with a team to plant this international church. An international church is really just an English-speaking church that welcomes all cultures and languages. And so we'll be primarily speaking English because most Europeans actually speak English as a second language. But we'll be serving as the kids pastor and the worship pastor and youth pastor over there. So day-to-day life is going to be a lot of street ministry. The head pastor that we'll be going over with, he really believes in old school street evangelism, just beating the streets, preaching the gospel as much as we can to get as many people in the doors and teach them about Jesus. So we're just reaching the community as much as we can and just discipling them. We actually have 2 of our team members who are already over there who have a house church, about 45 people right now, and that's going to be the launch team for our international church, Alicante Church. And so it's really just discipling people to make disciples in the community.
Yeah, like she said, we have about 45 people in our house church right now, and already we're seeing just crazy stories of how they're getting connected. And really, it's because in our city of Alicante, there's really not many options. There are 6 churches in our city. It's a city it's a city larger than New Orleans. That's what I always say, because it's 100, like over 100 million people, and
it only has 6
and there are
churches.
6 churches. So yeah, each church has to reach 63,000 people in order for our city to be reached. All 6 of those churches, they are all Latin American led and Latin American attended. I went to a church called Iglesia Cristo Vive, and it was 100% Latin American. There was not a single Spaniard or European in the congregation. I was the only.
So they're in Spain.
They're in Spain.
And there are no Spanish
and there are no
people
Spaniards
in the churches.
Yeah, and so what we see as AGWM is that when you plant a English-speaking church in the city, or in a city, they did it in Madrid, they did it in Barcelona, they do it in Berlin, they do it everywhere, that when you plant an English-speaking international church, you actually draw in the Europeans. And so what our team members did, they literally just created a website called Alicante Church. Like, that was the website. And they put on the thing, we are English-speaking. And within a week, we had dozens of people who were in our city who were like, I love Jesus, and I need a place to meet, and there's nothing for them. The closest English-speaking church, so if a German moves to our city of Alicante, Spain, before we got there, their closest access to the gospel would have been 2 hours away. So they would have had to drive 2 hours in order to go to church somewhere. So we're planting this English church in the city in order to draw in the Europeans. But what we also see is that it draws in the Spaniards as well, because the Spaniards feel more comfortable in a diverse culture than in the monoculture of a Latin American church. So does that kind of answer why we're doing international church planting?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that's such an odd thing, at least I wouldn't have thought about, that the best way to reach Spanish people is to do an English-speaking church in Spain, because Spanish people don't go to any of the churches in Spain because they're all,
It's wild. It's wild, and that's why when we say, we're planting the English-speaking church, people are like, why?
But it makes sense, because most people, whatever their primary language is, English is probably their second. And so you can reach a much broader population by just going after the second language than each individual language, because, Spain, most European countries are pretty diverse ethnically, but if they still have that common English language, you can reach more.
Yeah, and like about 70 to 80 years ago, Spain started teaching English in their elementary schools. So everyone under the age of 80 speaks pretty fluent English. And so we're able to, connect with them that way. So right now in our Church of 45, we have a Swedish family, a German family, a Belgian family, French family, a few Spanish families, and we're seeing that diversity already being established. And then we're Americans, so obviously.
Nice. But so you're going to be doing the kids ministry, you're going to be leading worship on top of just reaching out in the community on a regular basis. And how long are you going to be there for?
We'll be there for 2 years.
And then what?
We'll see what the Lord has for us next. So Blake and I actually do feel called to lifetime missions, specifically in Europe. So after our 2 years, we're just going to look at where the church is. We're actually planning on raising up nationals to take our places within the church staff. So we're hoping within those 2 years that we can actually have nationals replace us. And if they have, that means we get to come home for a little bit for a sabbatical, and then we're just going to see where the Lord leads us next. It might be Northern Europe because there's really a need in there. There isn't a lot of AGW missionaries in Northern Europe, but there's a great spiritual need there. Or we might go Western Europe or wherever. We're really just, this is our first step, and we're really focusing on this church plant, and then we'll just let the Lord lead us in our next steps.
So you guys are committed to 2 years there, and then just your hearts for Europe and just wherever God leads and guides within that.
Yeah, God's given us a real burden for secular peoples within Europe. So whatever that looks like, wherever we're at, whether it's through church planning or whether it's business as missions, the communion guy was talking about his friend who's doing business as missions. It's like we do that a lot in Europe as well. So we don't know what the future looks like.
Yeah. So I got a couple questions. If you guys could just give us some suggestions or some advice on in terms of, you shared kind of your story about how you felt God called you to missions. And, basically the Lord called you into missions just by giving you peace about what he'd spoken to Blake. I mean, just some really, it's great to hear such different stories from missionaries of different ways that God calls. So, what advice could you give to the people here, the people of Grace Point, if they're listening to know if maybe God is calling them to be a vocational missionary or some type of vocational ministry, to go somewhere else or do something particular for his kingdom?
Yeah, so we did not have a big call, I guess. Like we said, most of the time people romanticize or over-spiritualize the call to missions. They think, like we were talking about, the sky opens up and the Lord directly speaks to them. Or some people we talked about with church planning, they went to a red light and they just started crying and they knew that the Lord was speaking to them. For us, it really wasn't that way. And for most missionaries we actually spoke to when we went to our big training in June in Missouri, most people don't have a big call like that. For us, it was we saw a need. We saw just the culture in Spain was unacceptable, and we were in a position to help. So for most people, it's just listening to the Lord. If it's a group of people or a community that he's placed on your heart, that's usually where your call to missions is you feel a burden to help them, and you are in a position that you can actually go and dedicate your time to them.
Yeah, and my advice is always, wherever your talents and your fears intersect, that's probably where the Lord is calling you to go. So if it's cross-cultural ministry or if it's talking to your neighbor, wherever your talents and your fears intersect, that's probably where you're called to minister. But also, we as a body of believers, we are called, and we have all been given that great and glorious sky opening up call. Jesus in his Great Commission, like y'all just read, Pastor told us, you just read it last week, that was the big and glorious call, where the sky opened up and the risen, resurrected Jesus said, "Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them all that I have commanded. And lo, I will be with you even until the end of the age." That was that great big call. So if you see, what I always say is, if you want to figure out where God called you to minister, hang a map on the wall, close your eyes, and throw a dart, because there are people around that dart who are lost, who are hurting, who are needing to encounter Jesus.
No matter where the dart
No
lands.
matter where the dart hits.
Or just go. Anywhere. Because there's people everywhere who don't know Jesus. Or maybe have a poor understanding of who Jesus is, or they've heard of him, but they have no idea what it means to follow him and to live life in his kingdom with him. And I love that you asked the question, if you want to know where you're called, you realize that's a loaded question? You guys know what a loaded question is? A loaded question is not like a loaded baked potato, but those are awesome. A loaded question is one that assumes another question in it that you don't really deal with. You're just assuming. You're smuggling two questions into one. Because if I just say, where did God call you to ministry, what am I assuming? That you are called. But if the Great Commission is for all of us, and it is, then you are called. You don't have to pray about, God, are you calling me to go make disciples? Nobody needs to pray about that. You just need to maybe pray about where or under what circumstances or what this looks like, but you're called. That's a great point to bring up. Another thing is, you've done the work with Chi Alpha, working with those college-age kids that so many of America's churches, Western churches, young people of that age are all turning away from Jesus in droves. So what practical suggestions or advice could you guys give us on some ways to reach those young people when we have opportunities to encounter them, and as well to keep in mind for our kids and grandkids and whatever family members we have hitting those ages?
Yeah, so what we've seen with this generation, Gen Z, our generation of college students, is that they don't know Jesus. Even if they grew up in church, most of the time, these students do not actually know the stories of the Bible. So we just tell people, preach Jesus. Preach the love of Jesus, the radical love that is just overwhelming. They just don't know. They've never encountered Jesus in that way because they've just never been told that story. So simple as it is, preach Jesus.
Yeah, I actually commended your pastor here because he was telling us about what y'all have just done. Y'all just went through the entire book of Matthew. I was like, fantastic, because what our generation is crying out for is the word. They're crying out for Jesus. They can go on YouTube and look up TED Talks and get motivated and hear motivational speakers and hear topics like, that gets them all motivated, makes them feel good, but they can't just go on YouTube and hear authentic stories about Jesus and have authentic encounters with Jesus. That is something that only the church can supply. And our generation is dying and crying out for an encounter with Jesus. That's what I needed. That's what all of my friends that I've met, that's what they all need. They have problems with the church. They have problems with morality. They have these problems. But when they come face to face with the beaten, bloodied, smiling face of Jesus, that is what changes their life. Preaching Jesus. That applies to our generation. It also applies to Europe as well. Europe for centuries has been deprived of Jesus and his story. There was one story we have of a family. It was a man and his son was going to one of our churches in Granada, Spain. And in Granada, Spain, they have a festival leading up to Easter where they have a parade where they pull a big old statue of Jesus crucified through the streets. And they take it down, and everyone goes out there, and there's funnel cakes, and it's fun. So anyway, one of our missionary friends, he was talking with this father, and he's like, "Hey, are you going to go to the festival?" And he was like, "No, I can't go to the festival." And he's like, "Well, why? Like everyone in the city goes. Why can't you go?" And he said, "Well, whenever I was a kid, and I went with my father, I asked my dad, 'Who is that man on the cross?' And my dad didn't know. He didn't know who that guy was. He didn't know what his name was. He couldn't tell me anything about him." And he said, and the man said that in that moment, I lost all respect for my dad. I can't bear the thought of going to that parade and having my son ask me that question and me not be able to answer it. And so our missionary friend was like, "Well, have you ever heard about the crucifixion of Jesus?" And was able to share the story of Jesus. So it's something that we've taken for granted. We assume that everyone knows these stories. We assume that everyone knows what Jesus has done for them when they don't.
So really, we just shouldn't overcomplicate it.
Don't overcomplicate it. Jesus. Preach Jesus. Focus on Jesus.
Yeah, the way we try to talk about it is just to make disciples, you got to introduce people to Jesus and help them learn how to follow him. Like, just simple. hey, this is Jesus. Jesus, this is my friend. You guys need to talk a little bit. And if they meet Jesus, he hooks them. We don't have to hook them. We don't have to get them wrangled in. We just have to introduce them to Jesus. And if people have an encounter with Jesus, they truly become his disciples. They're his students. They're learning from him. They're hearing from him. They're speaking with him. And all we have to do is help guide them and say, this is what my walk with Jesus looks like. We can do this together.
Yeah, and that's universal. Like, we see a lot on college campuses and in Europe, secularism, which is like this concept. It's very complicated, but one of the aspects of secularism is mosaicing, where people will pick and choose what they want from different worldviews and different ideologies, and then they incorporate it into their own self-made religion and self-made worldview. So you'll have people who will pray like a Muslim, who will meditate like a Buddhist, who will listen to the Sermon on the Mount by Jesus and apply those to their lives and kind of create their worldview based on that. What we've seen is that it doesn't matter whether they're secular, whether they're hardcore Muslim, whether they're whatever. No one has a problem with Jesus. Like, everyone's who is lost, all of their problems with Christianity is problems with the church or with Christians. No one has a problem with Jesus. And so when you point them back to Christ and you tell them this is what Jesus said, then they will fall in love with him. And then all of the other hurts and all of those wounds that have been given to them by Christians or the church or whatever, all of those will be healed by his loving, healing hands. So yeah, Jesus is seriously like the duct tape of evangelism. Like, it goes on everything, it fixes everything, he just works.
Yeah, so if we just forget about systems and methods and models and we just give them Jesus, that's kind of how we should do it. Yeah. And if you guys are note takers, write that down. Just give them Jesus. That's all they need.
If you want to be good at evangelism, just become students of what Jesus said and who he was. Like, just read your Gospels, know what Jesus said about things, understand how he treated people, and then exemplify and teach that. Right? You have anything else to say?
Yeah, Blake was sharing earlier, when they went to some of their missionary training, they told them during this stretch or whatever, they needed to read through the whole Bible every 3 months. And they really needed to more or less memorize the Gospels. Like, just be so immersed in Jesus and his person and his teaching and his examples and what he did that they could almost just quote it, because anytime somebody comes up that they engage somebody that doesn't know him or has an issue or a question, the primary thing on our mind is, well, this is what Jesus said. This is what Jesus did. This is how God has spoken to us through his son. And the first thing that came to my mind is, like, that should be just every Christian training. That's not missionary training. That's follow Jesus' way of life, that we should just be so immersed in Jesus through the Gospels. That's wonderful. So what can we as a church and as individuals, how can we best pray for you guys, and how can we best help support you to get you over there for these 2 years to do what God's called you to do?
Yeah, so we always tell churches that there are 3 main ways that you can partner with us, and the first one is pray. First off, you can just pray for us as we're going over there. Europe is very spiritually dark, so we need as much spiritual and prayer protection as we can get. Also, just praying for the lost in Alicante. 99.8% of Spaniards in our city are lost. They are not Catholic, they are not Christian or anything. They are absolutely lost, and they have not heard the name of Jesus. So we're asking for people to go ahead and prepare the field for us and pray for those hearts, for them to encounter Jesus. And also just be praying that you would have a passion to reach the lost in your own community. So pray to the Lord to give you a passion just to reach the lost, to pray for them, and serve your community in whatever capacity that you can.
Yeah, and then the third way you can help is by going, like she said. Like, go. Go to the people in your community. Go to the ends of the earth. If you have any questions about how you can get involved with missions, we know the people to get you in contact with, so come talk to us at our back table.
Yeah, and then that second one that was in there is you can give. So some people are goers and some people are senders. So pray to the Lord and ask him if you are able to give financially, give to your church and their missions offering, give to individual organizations and missions just to get them on the field. And you can also just give sacrificially and give your time to your church to help them reach the community or to whatever mission field that you feel called to.
So if God has moved your heart to give something to help support them financially, to get them over to Spain quickly and to be able to be fruitful there, just write, if it's a check, just write Blake and Allison on the memo or put it in an envelope and write missionaries on it and put it in the box. We'll make sure it gets to them. You can still do that. Everybody has to walk past it on your way out. Just throw something in there for the missionaries on your way out, and we'll make sure they get taken care of as best we can. You guys got anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize, Allison said, pray for the lost in our city. Yeah, 99.8% of the Spaniards in our city are lost. 99.8. They are, they're not affiliated with any church. We have, there's strong cultural Christianity within the Spanish culture. So statistics can sometimes be misleading. So when you ask someone, are you a Christian in Spain? They will say yes. They're like, of course, I'm Catholic. Of course, because I'm a Spaniard. And you're like, okay, well, when's the last time you went to Mass? So that's like their services. And he's like, oh, I've never been to Mass. And it's like, well, dude, you're not a Catholic. You're not a Catholic then. If you're not going to Mass, you're not considered Catholic. And so what we see is that 99.8% of the Spaniards are actually lost. And unfortunately, that statistic is not just for the Spaniards. On every country, from Finland to Italy, from Spain to Russia, that statistic plays out within the national Europeans. So there's an entire continent where hundreds of millions of people don't need wells dug, they don't need orphanages built, they don't need food distributed, but they are living and they are dying without the gospel. And so don't forget about Europe. Pray for Africa, pray for our missionaries in Latin America, pray for the Middle East, pray for China, but don't forget about Europe. Pray for the hard hearts that are in Europe, that secularism that is strong.
And that makes it challenging. If you guys remember Doug and Susan Scott, who were going to be worked with Global University, they were going to be guiding us on the trip to Israel, which, praise God, that was canceled. We would have been there during this stuff that just happened yesterday. So thank God for his timing in that. But I'll never forget, one of the first things I said about Doug and Susan when we started talking with them, or one of the first things they said to me when we asked about how their fundraising was going, and they said, it's hard because Bible schools are not sexy. People in churches love to give money to kids ministries, and they're going to go work with students, and they're going to go to campuses and little kids and orphanages, and that stuff is very attractive. But saying we're going to go to Bible colleges and teach is not as attractive to and when you say things like, yeah, they don't need wells, they don't need orphanages, they don't need all of the things that most people think of with what can we do overseas, but they're living and dying without Jesus. And so we don't see the material needs, but praise God, they don't need that stuff. But some of that stuff makes it even harder for them to know Jesus and be willing to come to Jesus because they don't have those physical needs. So we really need to pray.